for stories?
I don't know. I'd have to think through on a different level than I'm thinking now. You mean of specific incidents, of specific things that a chaplain specifically asked me to do.
Well, or that you saw Rabbi Klausner involved in. For instance,
but
were you
it's hard
involved
to
in
say.
illegal activities with
It's hard to say because we were all involved in everything all the time. For example, while I had a camp I had 2 camps in Firth. Firth is a suburb of Nuremberg. We had 2 very large camps in Firth. I had a large camp in Bamberg. I had a large camp in Bayreuth. At that same time, the illegal immigration was going on across a community called Hof, which was a border community between Germany and Czechoslovakia.
What role did Rabbi Klausner play in that?
What? Everybody played a role in everything who was involved.
Explain what took place. Did he take a primary role? Was he able to help in any way?
I can't.
Because of his position of being a chaplain, an army chaplain, an officer in the U.S. Army?
Not because he was a chaplain and not because he was an officer in the U.S. Army, but because he was an enormously involved, active person.
Okay, because he was an enormously active person.
I would be very hard put to...
But perhaps what we ought to do is from the other way. Maybe what you ought to do is tell your story, and if you ever think of another person who was very actively involved, who happened to have gone to rabbinical school and happened to be there at the time.
You see, I know what you're getting at is very, very specific. I don't think that I can separate it through, and maybe it's because it's become one enormous blurb now. I cannot separate it in terms of specifics. There was so much going on so many different levels.
All right, let me be specific then. What about the package program? Are you familiar with that? Where the chaplains requested packages be sent through GIs to various...
I wouldn't accept that because we were all requesting packages.
Okay.
And everybody was...
He tells it that I think he was... Max Wall took Klausner's place, or was it just the opposite? No, I think what happened was...
See, Klausner was there for a number of years, then he left, and then he came back.
It was a Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, and because Klausner was running around all the time, Klausner told the GIs to send it to Wall. So thousands of packages kept coming to Wall. Other chaplains say that this is what they did as well.
But see, it wasn't only chaplains. That's why this story is...
Well,
it's very hard to distinguish it in that way because, for example, I was in Nuremberg where there was no chaplain. At least if there was, I never had any awareness of it. And we needed stuff there, and you know through whom I sent packages was... he's been at our house. He then went to work for American Jewish Committee. Paul Friedman. Paul Friedman.
Yeah.
All right, now we got, but it wasn't unique to me or to, everybody was doing everything in any way that you could grab at and think of. If you were there and you had an idea to write to your Aunt Emma because she had a club in Brooklyn and she could send sheets, you send sheets. He would send writing paper, somebody else would send packages. There were actually very few of us. There weren't that many ever. Okay? And everybody just, to the best of their ability, with whatever contacts they had, with whatever energy they had, you kind of dug in on 20 different levels.
Okay, well...
I would not be able to distinguish.
But they were able... I picked this one specific area first, because here was where there was unilateral or unanimous agreement by the chaplains that there was this specific program initiated by them.
Of packages?
Of packages. I mean, I am not arguing with you. I don't know. But
I wouldn't accept that because I know that there were many package programs that that were initiated, and B, many that were not initiated by us. There were many that were initiated quite independent of anybody here in the United States.
For example?
For example, you already had pioneer women and labor Zionists and Hadassah and community groups and.
But how did they know that it was needed?
Well, everybody, you could have never left your house here on 72nd Street and you knew what the need was. After all, this was common knowledge by then.
But who did they know to send it to?
I worked then, prior to this, prior to my going overseas, I was with government in San Francisco. And it happened that the last 6 months of my employment, I was with the Office of War Information. Now, we got daily bulletins. There wasn't anything we could do, and you were getting so much that you weren't reacting to it, but we knew exactly what the concentration camp story was and how many people were being killed and what the destruction was. We
So then why were you so surprised when you went over there?
But it's one thing, the surprise comes that it's one thing when the three of us now turn on TV and we know that there were 30 bombs over Saigon 10 minutes ago. And it's quite another thing when you're in Saigon and you see 10,000 orphans starving in the street. It's an entirely different thing. When you hear about, when you get hourly news bulletins, it's quite different than actually being there. You can know about a concentration camp and kind of have see a headline about it. It's quite different to be in the middle of Dachau.
Right.
So that there's no comparison between hearing about something and actually physically smelling it, tasting it, feeling it, experiencing it, and actually seeing the results. I think it's, I'm sure as you have, most of our friends who are certainly extremely well-traveled, who say that in spite of their knowledge and information, that India always comes to them as an absolutely overwhelming experience. And there's no one that we know who hasn't been in Calcutta and hasn't been totally shattered by it. Now we can sit here, we know what goes on, we know that there are people that die every single night in the streets of Calcutta, but it's quite different when you're actually leave your hotel and walk over dead bodies. So that there's no comparison between having had the information. How they knew where to send it, don't forget it wasn't 3 Siebertstrasse, for example, in Munich, which was JDC headquarters. By September, October, everybody in the States who was in any way connected with any Jewish organization or synagogue already knew the 3 Siebertstrasse is where it's at.
Do you remember how the 3 Siebertstrasse became the headquarters of the JDC?
It didn't. It just became because we had a few workers and that house happened to be available. There wasn't any.
Nobody else got it for them? Klausner wasn't involved in getting that?
In getting it? I don't know who specifically was involved. I know that Abe was, or Eli Rock. You already had, at the very, very beginning, you had a JDC country director who was Eli Rock.
Yes,
You mean? Philadelphia?
He's a love, a dear
That's
heart. Now Eli was the first one there. I don't know whether Eli got 3 Siebertstrasse, or Abe did, or I don't really know. I don't. You know, I think that a lot of what you're getting at that time was so unimportant.
Nobody even noticed, really.
You didn't even notice as long as somebody got. Like, it didn't matter who got a Jewish hospital. It happened to be that Abe thought of calling in because nobody else had been successful in it, so I went and got it. But it could have been just as well someone else. I'm sure that somebody right at 3 Siebertstrasse probably wasn't even aware of the fact that I was the one that actually had made the contact with Marvin.
You seem to be painting a picture here of almost a team effort.
Well, I don't think it was that well organized.
It wasn't that well.
A team not organized. But,
Yes,
but
yes.
You worked in concert.
Yes, definitely.
There was a
Definitely.
little anarchy from it.
Anarchy in terms of the fact that it was a team in which Everybody
Everybody
had,
wanted.
everybody had the right to run in any direction
Right.
they wanted. However, if you ran anywhere too far away and you needed help, you could call on any other team member, and they'd, if they were a decent team member,
If they're available.
if they were available, they'd pitch in and help. I think that that's probably a a good way of having put it.
The reason I say that is I get the feeling that in certain areas that was the case, mainly in your area. It wasn't that way in other places. Although,
I tell you, I think it was that way, and, again, this always depends upon whom you're talking
Right,
to
no
and who's
question.
giving you the story.
No question.
To what extent they want to build up their own importance. For example, I can say that I and I alone got the Julius Streicher farm and it became Camp Neely, okay?
Okay,
But that's really not so, because there were still other people involved. There were the people who made it possible for me to get the car and get the chauffeur, and I wasn't the only one that had the 2 camps going at Firth, and I was driving with people. I asked about this farm, people talked about it. There were other people involved. It's true that at the end I thought, Jesus Christ, here's this place, wouldn't it be great if?
but weren't you the prime mover? In other words, that's what I'm trying to find out. In all
I
of
don't
this
think
story.
that there was a prime mover as such. I would say the prime mover was the situation itself.
Okay, and the necessities.
If there was any one prime mover, and Fred has heard me say this often, I would say that certainly above anyone else in the total situation, it would be Abe Klausner.
Okay.
And I think that even people who disliked him enormously, and there were many people who disliked him enormously, there were many, many people who were out for his head because he was totally atypical. You couldn't control him. He didn't fit into any category. You're seeing him now, by the way, as a much older man. He was very young then, very slender, very slight, enormously arrogant, very belligerent. He was quite a different person then than he is now. And I would say that he probably would be the only person that I think anyone, and certainly JDC, hated his guts. They detested him because he wasn't controllable.
I just think, when you
But-
write this story, you should call it Rashomon. You know Rashomon? Oh. Rashomon is a Japanese movie that showed some years ago. It's become quite famous in one of the new Japanese movies. And what it is essentially is a story of an incident that supposedly took place in Japan with a man and his wife and a bandit. And the thing is divided into 3 parts, and each one tells a story. And 3 entirely different stories.
The rest of it wasn't, the rest of it really wasn't any prime mover outside of...
Is everybody being pushed by necessity and by...
Well, in other words, what I'm trying
You see,
to...
I would
see
say
what I'm
this,
trying to
that
get
at
at.
the point at which it became stabilized, at the point at which JDC stepped in and tried to organize it, is when the thing lost its importance, it lost its verve, it lost its real vitality, was lost at the point at which they tried to compartmentalize it and organize it and have an organizational chart and the whole book. And it really started with a guy named Leo Schwartz, who was the guy who, it was first Eli Rock, and Eli Rock was replaced by Levi Becker. And Levi Becker returned to the States, and during the time that he was away, a man named Leo Schwartz stepped into it. And Leo Schwartz, in terms of that situation, and Fred will understand what I mean, is an Evan Spalt. He took a situation which was completely kind of wild and loose, but in its wild looseness is where it was possible for offbeat people like myself to function enormously well under the guidance of an Abe Klausner. Once you got somebody in who said, when I here's an office and you're my secretary and you do this and you do this and you do this and you pump, 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 the thing lost its verve and vitality. I think that the situation, had there not been an attempt to structurize the thing, if you will, I think that we would have accomplished a great deal more, and I think that the problem might have found a quicker solution.
you were stunted by this.
Well, I tell you how we were stunted. There was a point at which there was a reason. For example, in my being shunted off to Czechoslovakia, part of it was that I became the bane of UNRWA's existence. UNRWA became icky with me. JDC, that was formalized, became icky with this, who the hell's this thing up here, floating around. And because at this point, somebody from Israel, Ruth Kluger primarily, whose name you may know.
Mm-hmm. I haven't interviewed her.
Ruth Kluger said the situation in Czechoslovakia is going to become really the most important in Europe, and we need somebody totally unorthodox. So Anne Lipa was the one that was sent up there. I think most interesting, when I got the Streicher farm, JDC's first reaction was one of anger. It's not done. Who the hell is this one all of a sudden getting a chunk of property? It was only that within 48 hours there happened to be an enormous amount of very exciting publicity, and JDC was reaping the benefits of the publicity. Had it happened, and it happened that the publicity was there because it was in Nuremberg, and Julia Streicher was sitting on trial. And we had probably 5,000 people from the press. The press was there from all over the world. And it was an awfully good story, and it was kind of a break in the monotony of covering the trials. So it got a hell of a lot of publicity, so then JDC simmered down. But their first reaction was, it's not on the organizational chart. This isn't done. Abe Klausner's description always of the second and third wave of JDC workers, as well as chaplains, was somehow he always seemed to think that selling shoes at A.S. Beck's on Saturday was about as low as you could possibly fall on the totem pole. And he always said, good God, these people couldn't even get a job selling shoes at A.S. Beck's.
Well, what was his, what happened with the second wave?
The second wave already became more formalized. They were social workers. The second wave, the big emphasis was social workers.
Well, wasn't that what was needed at that point?
Absolutely not. It wasn't needed at that point, and it wasn't needed anywhere along route, and it's not needed now. What was needed was not a social work what was it that the social worker could know about dealing with German government, with military government, with people, with a completely disorganized, unorthodox situation? A social worker is trained in America with very strict, very limited, very narrow sights on how to deal with a given problem in an urban center.
They weren't creative.
And the problem there had no relation. It had no relation to anything. Its only relation was to a sensitive understanding of the many political and social and economic factors that were at play. It wasn't anything that social work could do. We weren't giving out charity, you weren't giving out welfare, you weren't structuring anything permanent. You needed people who could react and deal with an emergency, and the social worker is probably least capable of any person to deal with that kind of situation. It didn't relate to anything. For example, the people who I think did an outstanding job, non-Jews who did a spectacular job, were the American Friends Service. Mm-hmm. Now, American Friends Service, who are people who are only taught, if you will, to respond to people's needs and to do whatever is, quote, good. So that they were very good. Now, they did things on a very limited basis because they couldn't respond in terms of the bigness of the problem. But they were very, very good about responding to individual needs. And these were non-Jews, they weren't rabbis, weren't chaplains, didn't know from anything. They were just awfully nice people who wanted to help people who needed help.
Mm-hmm. Were you...
It was much the same situation, I think, as the kind of response you get when there is a earthquake or a flood, where everybody drops everything and all kinds of people rush in and do whatever they can in order to alleviate the ache and the pain of the moment.
Getting back a little more to, but I don't mind digressions, by the way. I think they're very important. Were you involved in any way with the illegal activities across the borders? And by that I mean sending people over to the eastern part of Europe to bring back Jews.
You mean in reverse? No. My involvement for the year that I was in Czechoslovakia on the Polish-Czech border was purely in terms of coming out and finding their way into the American zone.
Yes, I'm sorry, that's what I meant. In other words, going in, well, Rabbi Klausner told me he sent in people. He gave them money because the money was needed to go in and to try to take out from Eastern Europe as many people as they possibly could.
I wasn't involved in that aspect of it. Mine was in Hof. It was a question of being on the border when the people were already coming out. I don't know who sent whom in advance to bring them as far as the border. I picked them up at the border and made it possible for them to cross the border and to come into Germany and then to provide the transportation and get them into an American zone camp. In Nachod, it was a question of organizing the movement where they were coming out of Poland, crossing the border into Czechoslovakia, getting them on trains so that they could go across Czechoslovakia to Bratislava and then on to Vienna and to Linz to Salzburg and find their way up into the American zone. It was like a reverse J. They came down Czechoslovakia, across Austria, and up into Germany.
Were you involved with the passports, the little passports that he instituted?
No. I was involved in people in Germany itself, in our camps, where they wanted to move across Europe, where they wanted, for whatever reason, to get into France or to get into other parts of Europe or into Austria because they wanted to look for relatives, or I cut travel orders like crazy. I reached a point where I could cut travel orders as good as any military travel orders. I knew how to sign anybody's general name. I have a whole mess of them here, by the way, in the file, of where I'd make these marvels, because they couldn't move without travel orders. I got a number of our people into, for example, into the trials in Nuremberg. You know, we had a newspaper, as you've heard, Unser Weg.
Right.
And some of our people, of course, wanted to be accredited to it. Needless to say, the Nuremberg trials weren't about to accredit something called Unser Weg. And I got for Grobman, whom you've met, who was our official correspondent, I got him a uniform. I made a marvelous patch, a correspondence patch that said war correspondent on it. I cut marvelous papers for him, and I got him through, and he covered all the trials.
And they thought that he was a foreign correspondent?
Correspondent for something called Unser Weg. There was every other crazy paper in the world that was there, so he became a correspondent. I got him into, he was staying at the castle, the official castle outside of Nuremberg, where all the correspondents stayed.
Was Rabbi
And I got,
involved
what's
in
his name into it? Levi Shalatin.
Was Rabbi Klausner involved with this effort in any way?
He was aware of it, of this effort with Grobman. I don't think so. A was always very much aware of anything I did.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
But you worked separately? In concert, but separately?
In concert, but separately, yes. But certainly if it was anything, he would come to me and ask me to do things. If it was anything unusual, I would sometimes check with him. He was aware of everything that was going on. I
Like a family?
Like an extended family, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, by the way, within this structure, like any other organizational structure, there were groups within groups. There were cliques.
Sure. How many people were
And
talking
the cliques were inevitable. For example, There's certainly the primary group, which was the Central Committee of Liberated Jews. I was completely accepted in that group as against the other JDC workers, but I was completely accepted because of the fact that I was working closely with Abe, so that Abe broke the ice in it. Of course, the other acceptance was that there weren't that many of us. I spoke Yiddish very well. I liked them, they liked me, and I think they also responded to the fact that they liked a doer. You know, it would also be hard for me to distinguish the difference in attitudes. I don't know to what extent these were attitudes that they picked up from Abe or attitudes that they had on their own.
Well, they must have been doers themselves to have been able to get as far as they did.
Yes.
Yeah, they were, weren't they?
Yes, they had all come from certainly backgrounds where they had proven their own worth.
And not only that, but it seems that...
Oh, by the way, there's somebody else whom everybody overlooks in the thing who should be talked to, because he was there in the very, very early days, and he was one of the first people to leave to come to America, and that's Misha Bukans.
Yeah, where is he?
He's right here on Riverside
Oh,
Road.
yeah, on Riverside Road.
Down the course.
Yeah, everybody's there, the whole movement.
Well, you're here in the heart.
Jewish conspiracy,
What's your home?
Jerusalem now.
Yeah, but I mean when you were in the States.
Cherry Hill, New Jersey.
Because as you, I don't know whether you know Manhattan, but this primarily really is very heavily Jewish.
This area?
This area, Jewish and Puerto Rican.
Puerto Rican, yeah.
It's a good combination.
Great combination, right?
Misha what?
Bukans.
How do you spell it?
I think B-U-K-A-N-C-Z, isn't it?
Or A-N-C-E.
Maybe A-N-C-Z.
I can get you that number. I can get you the
Where
address
is he
of
from
it.
originally? Poland?
Misha is from the same place as Yanko. Memel.
Now, what
They're
did
all
he,
from
Latvia.
them.
what did he do?
He was one of the first members of the Central Committee of Liberated Jews, and he was one of the very, very first who came to America, who he had a brother here in New York, and he was able to legally get him out way at the beginning.
Okay.
You know, there's a whole other story there that you should get too, is the Hayas story.
Good, I can't, huh?
Yeah.
The Hayas
Yeah.
story, or do you have that covered?
Not yet.
Because Hayas is a very, very important.
We don't know anybody there anymore.
Well, Israel Jacobson,
What's his name?
Gaynor
Gaynor
Jacobson.
Oh, yes. I'm trying to get a hold of him.
He's a very important part of it because he was in Czechoslovakia, he was in Hungary, he's now head of Hayas. But Hayas, he doesn't know, unfortunately, no one but Ilusha de Jour
That's the
knew
only
that
one. Yeah.
early story, because he was the first one,
That's why I said we don't
he
know
was the
anybody.
very, very first Hayas person that came into Germany.
He's dead.
No, he's still alive. Is he
But
there?
is he? I think he's died.
Did he? I don't
But
know.
he might have, you know,
Yeah,
for
might
practical
have.
purposes, he might have been an invalid, he was an invalid.
But he was superb. Oh, by the way, I think I can lend you a book in exchange for this one. And that's Ilusha. Hayas didn't come into Germany until the beginning of 46. Because Hayas came in already. Hayas was a legal organization. Hayas came in with, you know, with visas, with the whole machinery, but he came in to investigate, beginning of 46. Jeez, what's her name is at Hayas? And she has a marvelous story.
Flora Levin?
No. Oh, damn. She became head of their women's division. I see the girl in front of me. I can't recall her name. I'll get that name
You don't
for
know
you.
it?
Okay.
No. Mm-mm. She became head of the women's division at Hayas. And she was in Germany in the early days. Have you been told to go to see a gal named Rosalie Westreich? Has that name come up? Rosalie Westreich was the first secretary the first secretary that JDC had in Germany. She's here in New York. She would be very, very well worth talking to. She was secretary, so she knew the whole story from a financial, clerical, organizational